Good. All right. Welcome, everybody. Nice to have you here. As you can see, it's a little chilly where I am, so I'm bundled up. Um, Today, as usual, I would like to share with you some things that I believe will be very useful to you so that you can achieve more of what is important to you and really ultimately to know yourself so that you can experience the real fulfillment that you are here to experience and know. So that's the main intention of this meeting as usual. And specifically, what I'd like to focus on today is the real power and blessings of responsibility. Specifically, taking responsibility for your own experience, your own life. And so that's the main topic that I'd like to explore today. And so this is something that is so fundamental. It's really what I'm talking about all the time, but I wanted to specifically focus on it today. And so if we're not taking responsibility for our lives, if we're not taking responsibility for our experience, then we are, by definition, allowing ourselves or perceiving ourselves as victims. And so if you are doing that, then the problem is that it's not that it's wrong or bad to perceive yourself as a victim. It's not that you should take responsibility. It's not anything like that. It's not a moral issue. Rather, it's just about what actually is going to give you the results that you want. And so, to the degree that you perceive yourself as a victim, which is another way of saying to the degree that you are not taking responsibility for your own experience, then you will be unsatisfied, unfulfilled, unhappy, and basically suffering because you will be making, you will at least be imagining that something outside of you is responsible for your experience. And if you think that something else is responsible for your experience, then there's really nothing you can do about that, at least not really. But if you pay attention, what you'll notice is that to the degree that you believe that something or someone outside of you is responsible for your experience, then you will be attempting completely in vain to manipulate things outside of you to comply with how you think they should be so that you can have the experience that you want. See how that works? So if you think that something or someone outside of you is responsible for your experience, then you will be compelled to try somehow to figure out how to manipulate circumstances so that you can have the experience that you want to have. But it won't work because if you do that, then you're putting the power where it doesn't belong, or you're imagining the power where it doesn't belong. And if you're doing that, then you can't actually utilize the power that you really have. So you would be um, just putting things all in the wrong order, and you wouldn't get results that way. You would, I mean, you would get results. You just wouldn't be happy with the results. You would be needlessly suffering as a result of that. Whereas when you take responsibility for your own experience, then despite the fact that there is some possibility that initially that might be challenging, um, in the long run, it will actually give you the real results that you want because you'll actually be living in alignment with truth. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. So it's not, again, it's not a moral issue. It's not what's right or wrong or good or bad. It's just a matter of how things actually work. So let me see if I can come up with an analogy quickly for this. I mean, it would be sort of like, if let's imagine you live in a house with electricity and everything's wired up. So you've got lights and a light switch and the bulbs work and everything's functional, but it's switched off. And you would like to have some light, but you are certain that it's somebody else's fault. So there you are sitting in a dark room and you're just insisting that it's somebody else's fault. Somebody else is to blame for this. And so you could sit there for a really long time in the dark and just, get yourself all worked up about how, everybody else is to blame and nobody else is doing the right thing and everybody else needs to do things so that you can have some light. But still you're in the dark. Or you could just accept responsibility yourself and you could go over and flip the switch, in which case you get the light. So life is like that. Everything is actually there for you. All the power is there. Everything's all the structure and the function. It's all there. You just need to actually do your part. Um, and so a lot of the time, though, we are believing that we are powerless. We're believing all kinds of stories about how it's somebody else's fault and I can't do anything and woe is me and look at me, I'm just a victim. Nothing works out for me. People don't treat me fairly. I wasn't born in the right family. I wasn't born to the right circumstances. I didn't get lucky. Why does everybody else get lucky? In fact, I'm not just not lucky, I'm unlucky. I'm actively unlucky. Life is working against me. And so that uses an enormous amount of energy. And then it gets worse because then we're trying to solve the problem looking at it incorrectly. So So the solution, as I've already said, I mean, this is not rocket science. It's just as simple and straightforward as taking responsibility for your own experience, which is to say, um, so first of all, to accept that actually nobody else could possibly be responsible for your experience. So why don't we just take one big step back just to set the stage so this can actually make sense. So just notice that and this will be totally obvious, but just notice what you're actually experiencing is your experience and nothing else. So, I mean, like you're not experiencing somebody else's experience, right? It's your experience. You're experiencing it. It's your experience. So anything that, whether you like it or you don't like it, it's still your experience. It's all your experience. It's always your experience. There's nothing else ever that you're going to ever experience other than your experience. So any problems that you have are existing in your experience and only in your experience. And conversely, anything that's going delightfully, it's also happening in your experience and only in your experience. So it's all happening in your experience. So how would it be possible that somebody else could be responsible for that? It can only be you. It's because it's your experience. Nobody else has access to it. It's only you. This, of course, is quite different from how most of us think about our lives and ourselves, and it's quite different from how we're taught for the most part. It's quite different from how most of the cultures that we live in uh, teach us about these things. So most of the time, most of the focus is on everything outside of us. It's the government, it's the parents, it's the teachers, it's the neighbors, it's the criminals, it's the this, it's the that, it's the rich people, it's the poor people, it's everybody else and everything else. It's the weather, it's the environment, it's God, it's this, that, and the other. It's everything else other than me. It's genetics, right? How about that one too? It's my genetics. It's just I just got a raw deal. It's not my fault. I just am this way because of my genetics. I can't help it. And it's a very popular way of thinking that we are just victims of all the things. So, victims of the world, victims of genetics, victims of systems, victims of all these different things. Well, I mean, you're welcome to continue to believe that because, like I said, it's not a moral issue. I mean, you're absolutely welcome to believe that. And you could argue that that's true. You say, oh, but that's just true. And Joey, you're delusional. I mean, why are you going to argue in favor of what's clearly just stupid and delusional? And it's not even about it's not about a moral issue. It's also not about what we could argue to be true at an intellectual level. Rather, it's about what actually gives you the results that you want. So I think that's just maybe what we could come back to time and time again is just, are you getting the results that you want? Are you satisfied with what's happening? Are you satisfied with your experience? If so, great. Don't make any changes. But if you're not satisfied, then consider that possibly you could make some changes that would give you different results. And what I'm pointing to today is that taking responsibility for your experience is a really powerful lever that will allow you to do that. If you don't choose to use this to your advantage, then you're really making things extremely difficult for yourself. So difficult. I can't really see how you're likely to succeed that way at all, short of divine intervention. So that would be, I'm thinking of Saul on his way on the road to Damascus. It's like if you don't know the reference, it's a biblical reference. Saul was he was persecuting Christians, and so he hates Christians. Christians are the worst, and he's on the road to Damascus to go to persecute some Christians, and then he's struck uh, blind temporarily by by this, we'll say, spiritual light, and he's converted. He becomes Paul, the apostle, as a result of this conversion. Um, so I mean, so you could just cross your fingers and hope for something like that. Like you could keep on doing things the same way and just say, please, I hope that if I just keep doing things the same way, if I just keep making everybody else responsible, that somehow there will be a divine intervention that will work on my behalf. You could do that, but the odds are not in your favor. Like it could happen. I can't deny it. I mean, there are those stories. It's sort of like, the I don't know that much about his story, but I'm just also reminded of the guy Bill was his name, Bill, the guy, the Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12 Steps guy, founder. I think I think he had maybe a similar kind of conversion experience. So it does, it happens maybe, but I'm proposing that why wait when you could do something differently now? And then instead of keeping your fingers, just crossing your fingers and hoping that something changes without you changing anything, that you could actually discover exactly, specifically, what it is that you can change in order to get different results. So that's what I'd like to explore a little bit today. And I got a little bit of positive feedback that I shared a little bit of a few stories last week. So I'll share a story, personal story, just so that um, maybe this will, it will make it a little bit more real for you. So I was in Belgium. This must have been 2000. It was either 2007, 2008. I was in a hotel attempting to sleep. I say attempting to sleep. I don't know if that's really fair. I thought I was attempting to sleep, but I felt like I was suffocating. And I felt like I was suffocating. It would not, when I tell you why, it won't seem odd at all. I was wearing a face mask with this really thick uh, carbon filter in it. And this was before face masks were a thing. This was way before that. And so this was a face mask that was sold. I imagine it had to have been made and sold by people who I could really only say I would have to say kind of paranoids. For paranoids, I was certainly a paranoid. And so I had purchased this thing because I was paranoid, and I was convinced that I was very special and sensitive, and couldn't tolerate many things that if I was in a hotel, there would be things in there that I couldn't tolerate to breathe, because if I breathe them, then it would be, very, very bad. And I was convinced that I had lots of evidence that this was true, that I was very special in this way, and poor me, I didn't, I wouldn't have wanted to have had to have been in that situation in that condition, but there I was, and I was forced to be in this way. So there I was trying to sleep, so supposedly, but I really felt like it was suffocating because I was wearing this thing, self-induced, and so why was I doing that? Well, because I had really believed that, like I said, I was convinced that I was a victim of being very special and sensitive in these ways, and most of the rest of the population is not sensitive in these ways, so they're not bothered or they don't know that they're bothered, but I can't tolerate all of these things, so I have to take special precautions. I have to wear this, suffocating face mask, and while I was trying to sleep. And I was in Belgium because I had chosen to do this. I had been invited to speak at a series of conferences in Europe, and because I worked as a software developer at the time, and I was often invited to speak at conferences. So I had been invited to speak at a couple of conferences, and there I was. Um, so that was my life. My life was that I did those kinds of things. I lived in that way. It was absolutely terrible. It was just misery. I was causing tremendous amounts of suffering for myself and probably others around me. Um, uh, just day in and day out. And uh, I had all kinds of stories over the years about who was to blame for this. Uh, I thought it was well, I thought it was the at one point I thought it was some kind of let's say like well, some it was some sort of conspiracy. I thought it was a conspiracy at one point. And at another point, I thought, no, it's not a conspiracy. It's just because people are stupid. But it was other people, it's other people who were responsible. And then at another point, I thought, well, it's not necessarily a conspiracy per se, but it's at the same time, it's not really. Neither is it that just that people are stupid. There's some there. It's kind of us versus them, and so at a certain point, I even went down this line where I thought, well, this the uh, you know industrial civilization is the problem, and need to find a way to end industrial civilization. So I went down that pathway for a while. So I had all kinds of things, all kinds of ideas about what the problem was, and but all the variations on what I thought the problem was still were things outside of me. It was systems and people and situations and circumstances that were outside of me. And so I was a victim of all that. No matter what I was doing, I was a victim of that. And always those things were, well, I mean, obviously they were out of my control. Um, and they were bigger than me. And so it was just a completely unmanageable situation. And it took until 2012 and things got really, really, really bad when I finally realized that it just how unmanageable it was. So you would have it would have one would have hoped, I guess, that it might have become quite a lot more obvious to me much earlier in the process that it was unmanageable, but it wasn't. And this is often probably how it goes. I mean, you've probably noticed that it's easier to recognize for in other people when they're what they're doing and their attitudes are completely insane and unmanageable. Uh, but it's more challenging to recognize it in yourself or to admit it. Maybe it's not even that difficult to recognize it, but it's more difficult to admit it. Um, so you probably either know people or you know of people, and you can look at them and just say, well, gee, they're kind of they have some crazy thoughts, right? They're blaming other people for things that they should just take responsibility for themselves. They can make better choices and have a better experience. So you can make it's easy to make those judgments about other people. But then if you really take a look at your own life, well, you could try this. Try taking a look at your own life from outside, from an outside perspective. So imagine seeing your own life as somebody else might see you. Just for a moment now, just notice if you were to see yourself as others might see you, and particularly in regard to the problems that you perceive you have in life. You know, might you be able to then recognize that maybe there are some different, more useful ways of looking at things that might give you better results. So that might be a useful thing. Just easy, low-hanging fruit. Just play. It's a little game where you just imagine seeing yourself from an outside perspective, from a third person perspective. And that might be useful. It might help you to recognize how you've been playing some unhelpful games and deceiving yourself and deluding yourself. And so you could start to see things in a way that might be more empowering for you. You might start to realize that you can make some different choices. So that's one thing. Now, um, when it finally got to a point for me where I realized, okay, this is really bad, and this is a situation where nobody else is going to apparently um, make changes for me. And it's gotten to a point where if I keep doing the same things that I'm doing, then I'm not going to be around much longer. This is not, it was pretty clear that I dug a deep enough hole, it was going to be a grave, and in pretty short order. So I had to start doing something differently if I wanted different outcomes. And in other words, like a rude awakening, or hitting rock bottom. It was one of those moments. Now, fortunately, and so we could say there was a divine intervention because fortunately, in that moment, I actually uh, received that. Sometimes people don't, right? I mean, sometimes people just keep on going. They just keep on doing the same thing, even though they might have that moment where they have that realization that if I keep doing the same thing, I will, that will be a rapid dead end for me. Like I will die as a result of this in very short order. So people might have that realization and still not make any change. So could say there was a divine intervention in as much as I was willing to make the change or I was able to make the change. But I will propose that really, honestly, all of us uh, have that support in every moment. So it's certainly available to you now. You know that this moment right now is or certainly can be that moment for you in whatever way um, you might want to actually accept responsibility and make a change in your life. So it doesn't have to be as dramatic as what I just presented. I mean, it may not be a like you're going to die tomorrow if you don't make a change kind of thing, but it could be just a less dramatic version of that. Like maybe there's some unnecessary suffering in your life that you would like to change, but and you haven't yet changed it. And right now there is, let's say, a divine intervention occurring on your behalf, which is offering you this moment in which you can reflect upon that. And then you can discover ways in which you can make a change. So, um, so anytime really that you notice that something is not as you would like it in your experience, really is that moment. It is an opportunity. It is a divine intervention. You are being gifted with an opportunity to discover how you can take responsibility and do things differently. In a very real way, that is built into how things work. So we are really very blessed. A lot of the times it's all too easy to see ourselves as cursed to say, oh, why does God allow suffering and life is so hard and yada, yada, yada. But on the other hand, if you look at it in the way that I'm proposing, you might recognize that really the whole way in which life is structured is such that the moment that you veer off course, as it were, then you get feedback. Like if you don't like if you don't like your experience, if you don't like the way you feel, then that is actually feedback letting you know that you have been looking at things in a not so useful way and that you could make a change, but you have to just bring some awareness to it. So, um, so you could just notice right now if there's anything in your life where you're hurting in any way, if anything is not optimized. And then just see this as an opportunity. It's an opportunity for you to take that feedback and to make change through taking responsibility. Um, so that's the first step, really, is to have that awareness. So just recognize that anytime that you are not completely satisfied or happy with your experience, that it's really an opportunity for you to take that feedback and then take responsibility so that you can make a change to have a better experience. I mean, like, just because most people seem to believe that life is suffering does not actually make it true. It just means that most people believe that. But people could be mistaken. Large groups of people could be mistaken. So it's at least equally plausible that what I propose is true. That life is not actually suffering. That life is structured such that you get immediate feedback, and it's up to you what you're going to do with that. But if you insist, if you just dig in your heels and you say, life is suffering and I'm a victim, then there's nothing you can do about it. On the other hand, if you say, okay, so I am responsible for my experience is all that I have. There's nothing that I never experience anything outside of my experience, and my experience is entirely in me. So therefore, I actually have the power to make a change if I wish. So this feedback is useful to me. So if I don't like the experience, it's feedback that's useful to me. Let me take responsibility for that, and then I can make a change. So first would be just to acknowledge, okay, I'm not totally satisfied with this experience. Second thing would be to actually start to notice, well, what is the actual experience? And you might say, well, that's totally obvious. What's the value of that? So I could have said, well, what was my experience? My experience in this situation that I was describing to you a moment ago. Well, I can say, well, my experience was that I felt very uncomfortable. I was experiencing various kinds of discomfort, and that was caused by all of these various external factors. I could say that, but that was how I had been looking at it, and that had not been helping me. So I'm obviously not proposing that here in terms of the remedy. What I'm proposing is to actually notice what is the actual experience, not what is my story about the experience, but what is the actual experience. And this requires actually slowing down and going a little bit more within, we could say, and maybe having a little bit of patience with the process. So a lot of the time, what maintains the problem is let's say speed and urgency. So there's a we have so we have um, our unconscious can deliver up things very rapidly, and uh, that's useful because we we to a certain extent because we can it allows us to have patterns that we can make use of without any conscious awareness. So most things that we know how to do, most things that we're doing most of the time are happening unconsciously, and that's fairly useful to us. It allows us to build upon those things. So any skill that you've learned is is like this. It starts out you have to consciously develop the skill. You have to establish the patterns. Then they become unconscious. So, like walking would be an example, just one among countless examples, but it's a simple one that most of us would be able to relate to. So, if you consider walking, there was a time in which you didn't know how to walk. Okay, so you had to apply yourself consciously to learn how to walk. You probably don't remember that because it was such a long time ago, but you had to apply yourself consciously to learn how to walk. And then you establish the patterns well enough that you determined those were good enough, and then they became unconscious, which means that now you can walk and talk and do all kinds of things at the same time. Whereas when you're doing something consciously, you can only do that one thing. You can't do multiple things consciously at the same time. You can only do one thing consciously at a time. But unconsciously, you can do, I think, infinite things at the same time, in theory. Um, so there's not a limit to how many things can be done simultaneously, unconsciously, but consciously only one thing at a time. So it's really quite a remarkable and useful thing that we have the ability to establish patterns and do things unconsciously. However, uh, if the patterns are not optimal, then it's a problem if you continue to just repeat the same things unconsciously. And so when, and unconscious things are relatively fast, whereas conscious things are relatively slow. So a lot of the time, what happens is we avoid actually discovering what the real experience is because we're so accustomed to settling for whatever is offered up from the unconscious that we are oftentimes unwilling to slow down sufficiently to start to tap into the conscious access of things. So things will bubble up from the unconscious to the conscious in terms of just like labels or images. So you could ask yourself, what is my experience? And then a thing will pop up really rapidly and it will say, well, this is it. And it will be whatever's already the habit, whatever's already established, that will come up really rapidly. And if you try to slow it, if you slow it down, or if you choose to slow it down, it's entirely possible you might meet with some resistance to that. So you might experience some feelings that you experience as uncomfortable, for example. Um, so sometimes people will encounter frustration or anger or sense of like numbness or something, and it'll be a sense of like I can't do it, it won't work, this is too hard, this is stupid. So there'll be a resistance that will come up. But if you're willing to just slow down, be patient with the process, then what will start to happen is that all kinds of things will get unlocked and you'll start to get access to what's really going on here, what your actual experience is. So now I can give you some clues that might also be helpful in terms of discovering what your actual experience is. So you could notice that your actual experience consists of, uh, and this is not new for anybody who's been around before because I say this often. It consists of we could call it sensory data, so or your senses. So seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, and smelling. So that's what your actual experience consists of. It consists of those things. And then we uh, will layer that up to form what seem to be abstractions, but they're really, at a fundamental level, it's really just seeing, hearing, feeling, smelling, and tasting. That's really all you've got. Those are the fundamental building blocks. So to use my example that I started with, so if I just, was to actually notice what was the actual experience. The actual experience was, okay, I was feeling sensations, which is not entirely accurate either. I was just feeling. Okay, I was just feeling. But so I was feeling, I was hearing, I was seeing, I was smelling, I was tasting. And if it's all sped up sufficiently, then I'm not actually going to be present to the actual experience. Instead, what happens is I'm settling for the patterns that have already been established. So the patterns will then come in because there's too much happening too rapidly for me to be able to actually process that consciously. And so what will happen is it will start substituting concepts. So it will say, well, this is too much. I can't handle this. This is too painful. This is too uncomfortable. I'm going to die. So it will start coming up in those kinds of abstractions, like thoughts, beliefs, maybe images that are composites that are not necessarily what's actually here, but overlays drawn from the past, maybe. And then further abstractions applied to that because meanings will be applied to that. Again, it will be usually in the form of beliefs like I can't, it's too much, yada yada yada, these kinds of things. So that was really what my experience was. When I really would slow it down, there I would be in whatever the situation was, in a hotel or in a store or in my own apartment or whatever it was. I would be somewhere and there would be experience happening and it would be very fast and I would then be substituting these abstractions. So it would be, this is too much. I can't. This is terrifying. It's overwhelming. I'm going to die. I'm going to suffer. It's unbearable. All these kinds of things. And as long as I was settling for those things, then of course I was going to. How would I make sense of that other than to say, well, it must be something external. It must be something out there that's causing this. So then, mental activity becomes very fast, a lot of abstract thinking, a lot of problem solving. And so then I was lost. I wasn't actually present to what was really going on. But if I slow it down, if I was to, in that moment, slow it down, again, I would just notice, okay, there's feeling, hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling. If I just am willing to slow it down, then that's what I'll notice. And I will also probably notice all those abstractions, the overlays jumping in because that's the habit and my tendency is to grasp at them. But if I just keep slowing it down, and this is where initially that discomfort can be there because the habit is to grasp at all of the overlays, trying to make meaning of the whole thing. But that meaning is always the past meaning, which was not satisfactory. It's however I felt like I failed in the past, that's what's being overlaid now. And so that's where the discomfort is there's on the one hand, I'm setting the intention. I want to slow down and be present to the actual experience. I want to take responsibility for this. On the other hand, there's all of this overlay that's coming up, and the tendency is to grasp at it and try to do something about it because there's an assumption that there's a problem that I have to try and address. That it's not just this experiencing happening, that there's actually some problem and I have to do something about that. And that involve in order to do something about it, I have to know what it is. And in order to know what it is, I have to pay attention to all these overlays. And that it's very, very urgent. It's not, I don't have time to slow down because the problem is very urgent. If I slow down, then the problem is going to overwhelm me before I will have time to do something about it. So that's what keeps that whole pattern going is there's a problem, it's very urgent. I have to solve this problem. In order to do that, I have to pay attention to all of my thoughts about the problem. But actually, in order that does not lead to the solution. So what I'm proposing is to take responsibility for the experience is to actually first I have to notice what is the experience actually, not what are my theories about the experience, because those theories have not, I mean, if we tell the truth, the theories have failed to provide a satisfactory result. If the theories were good theories, then we wouldn't have the problem. The problem is there because the theories were not sufficient. And the deception is that, well, I just need to keep focusing on those theories so that I can somehow build it up to an even better theory. If I could, like I'm so close, I just need to keep working on perfecting the theory. If I get the perfect theory, then that's going to solve the problem. But it's actually taking me further away from the solution because it's actually doing is generating the problem. But I don't know that from that perspective, which is again why it might be useful to take that perspective of, third person perspective, just to look at yourself, because again, you can see other people and you can see where other people are just making mountains out of molehills, right? I mean, you can see when somebody else is insisting there's a big problem. Look, there's a big problem. You know, oh, they don't love me anymore, and you're like, yeah, whatever. They were no good for you anyway. Oh, it's the end of the world. They don't love me anymore. Yeah, but it was a terrible abusive relationship. Oh, but I can't go on. I don't know what to do. It's like, yeah, but you should just let go, move on. So you can see that for other people. Um, and so if you offer yourself that, just a moment of that, then that might be useful. It probably would not completely resolve things. It might, but it probably would not in most cases. But it would be a useful initial intervention, maybe just to offer that perspective so that then you can remind yourself that, okay, I've been actually thinking about this incorrectly. I've been delusional. And if I keep doing what I've been doing, then I'm certain to keep producing the same kind of problem. So what will be useful to me is to instead take responsibility for my own experience. And in order to do that, I first have to actually recognize what is the experience. And that requires that I'm present to the experience. Now I have to slow down and be present to the experience as it is. So um, I have often found that useful, but again, not as the complete solution in and of itself, but just as the helpful reminder. It's like having like you could be your own best friend with you all the time to keep reminding you, calm down, it's going to be okay. Just look at it from this other perspective. But then you actually have to be willing to take the advice and calm down and start to take responsibility for your own experience. So you have to then take the next step, which is, okay, notice what's happening. So, for example, if you think about whatever it is that's not optimal in your life, and you just notice as you think about it now, and you could try to amp it up, try to like get yourself stirred up about it, just so you can have some of the feelings there, and then just slow down and notice what's actually happening. What is your actual experience? So, and if the overlays are there that say, yeah, but it's about this, that, and the other, it's these other people or these situations or whatever, just notice, uh, is that actually true? is it actually true that anybody else or anything outside of you is causing what you're actually experiencing right now? Or is it actually true that you're experiencing this entirely within yourself? And might it be useful to just find out what it actually is? So then you could slow down within yourself and notice, what is this actually? What is really here? What's really happening? And you could notice that what's happening right now is hearing, seeing, feeling, tasting, and smelling. And if you just are willing to keep slowing it down, just stay with the actual experience as it is right now, you'll almost certainly, not almost, you will certainly notice that that is what continues to occur, is seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, smelling. And then you'll probably notice, to whatever degree you do at least, those overlays that pop in that say, oh, but what about this? But what about that? But what about this? Maybe it's this. Maybe it's this other thing. You don't want to forget about this. You have to take this action. It might go really badly. It might be unbearable. It might be the end of the world. It might be this. It might be that. So you might notice those things as well, those overlays that come in. And then you could just check in again and notice, okay, and what is the actual experience? And again, you'll certainly notice that the actual experience is feeling, hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling. So the actual experience is always that. It's always only that, which is really kind of amazing. So we make a really big deal out of it, but we don't usually acknowledge what it really is. So we, if you tell the truth about it, you're almost always you're actually focused on the overlays. So it's all the basically failed theories from the past that pop up trying to be helpful. I mean, and to be fair, I mean, an overwhelming majority of the things that come up are helpful, but you don't have to become aware of them because you're not perceiving you have a problem. So most of it is entirely functional. It's just that the stuff that you become aware of, those are the failed things. You become aware of them because there's friction there, because they're not working. And so those are the things where it's like, "Oh, but what about this? But what about that? But you should think about this, but you should figure out this thing. And this is scary. And you don't want to let that happen. And what about this? All of those kinds of overlays, those are failed theories from the past. They have not succeeded in actually accurately addressing what's going on, or sufficiently accurately addressing what's going on in order to make it frictionless. Instead, you're experiencing friction, and you could just keep giving attention to them, hoping that if you just keep doing that after all this time, that it will somehow miraculously just give you a different result. Or you could take that as a reminder that you haven't actually understood what's really happening here. And so it will be useful to actually notice what's really happening. So so in some way you probably could, and so I have at times completely resolved things just by staying with the direct experience. That's really, really powerful. And what's nice about it is that it's available to anybody, so you don't really have to learn any other techniques or anything. It's just always there. All you have to do is just slow down and stay with what's actually happening, which is always going to be seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, smelling. But you can't just tell yourself that. You have to notice that. That's the thing about it is you have to really actually notice it. So so it's possible that you might develop a strategy in the mind that says, "Oh yeah, I already know what's happening. It's all the senses. I've already figured that out." But that won't. That's not the same as actually slowing down and noticing. So to actually apply what I'm saying, you have to really be willing to slow down and notice what is actually happening. To really notice it directly now and now and now and now, and to just stay with that, because as you stay with that, then what happens is all this stuff, like I said, those overlays pop up. But if you don't give your attention to them, if instead you stay with the actual experience as it is, then those things will lose their energy, and instead something new will emerge. So that's one possibility. And like I said, it's available to everybody. So it's really wonderful in that way. You don't have to learn anything else. Um, and um, sometimes there are faster ways of resolving things other than just to stay with it. Uh, and so I'll just propose one other thing to you, just in addition, which can be useful. And this is just a variation on the same method that I've shared the last couple of weeks. So um, it's just working with polarities. So when you whatever it is that you notice, those overlays that pop up, you can work with those as overlays. So if there's just you just notice an overlay that pops up. So if there's an overlay, like you can just start with how do you feel. That's often quite accessible for people. So if if you're noticing that there's you're you're you perceive there's a problem or something that's not optimal, and then you slow down, and then as you slow down, just notice how how would you describe how you feel? What's the feeling that is coming up? So so there's an overlay because it's an abstraction. You're applying a label or a name to it. Just state what that is. Okay, so um, let's say discomfort, right? So I'm feeling discomfort. So then you just notice on the one hand, okay, so on the one hand, I feel discomfort. Uh, on the other hand, how would I like to feel instead? Okay, so this is just going to bring up the polarity. So all things are defined by by their polar opposite. So it's one of the fundamental laws of creation is that everything exists as uh, is defined by what it is not. So otherwise, there's no meaning to anything. So, like for example, day is only has meaning because of night. If there was no night, there would be no day. You might say that you think there would be, but there wouldn't be. How would you know what day was unless there was night? You can only know about day because there's night. You can only know about night because there's day. You can only know about light because there's dark. You can only know about dark because there's light. You can only know about up because there's down, and only you can only know about down because there's up. You can only know about um, self because there's other, and you can only know about other because there's self. So all things are like this. They exist as polarities. And that's fine, and there's no problem with that. So it's absolutely fine that things exist. So we're not trying to take that away. But the problem is when you become locked in and you lose the uh, flexibility to be able to let go. So if you become very locked in and as you say, well, light is good and dark is bad, then you've lost your flexibility. You're rigid, you're locked in, and this becomes problematic for you because anytime then that there is apparently dark, then if you say that dark is bad and light is good, then you have suddenly have a problem. So the polarities are not a problem, but your relationship with the polarity can be a problem. And this simple method can help to resolve your relationship with a polarity. It can release the attachments and the stickiness. So all you do is you just notice how you feel. So we can just do it for a couple alternations now. Um, Especially if this is new to you, it'll be useful just to have an experience with it. So just notice when you think about the problem, whatever it is, notice how you feel now. And then on the other hand, notice how you would like to feel instead. So just notice how you would like to feel instead. And then on the one hand, notice when you think about the problem, how you do feel. And then on the other hand, notice how you would like to feel instead. And on the one hand, you can notice how you do feel when you think about the problem now. And then on the other hand, you can notice how you would like to feel instead. And so now you can notice when you think about the problem, how you feel. And notice that that feeling is different than the feeling that you did have. So it's possible, even with just a few alternations, that the you could have completely released the charge there. That certainly can happen. So that's a possibility. Another possibility is that it didn't completely release the charge, but um, it released some of the charge, and as a result of that, then you'll notice that the feeling is different. It might be even you might even consider it to be a similar feeling, but it is different in some way than how you felt moments ago. And so just doing this simple exercise will change things. It releases the charge. And if you just continue that, it doesn't take very long. You'll completely release the charge. So that can be really useful. And that will do a couple of things. I mean, for one thing, it releases some of those patterns that are programmed into you, so they're not going to come up. And for another thing, as a result of that, it allows you to be more present to the experience as it actually is. So because there's less coming up, so you'll be less tempted to try and grasp at things. So you can just stay with the experience as it is. And then the more you can stay with the experience as it is, then to the degree that you want something to emerge, something new can emerge. I mean, it's also possible nothing would need to emerge at all, but most of us are not. Most of us are not at that stage yet where we don't want or need anything to emerge at all. Um, but certainly we could allow something new to emerge instead of staying stuck in the old patterns. So, but this comes from staying with the experience as it is. So just to recap, um, what I was proposing today is that so long as you keep doing things the same way, then it's not reasonable to expect different results. And if you are not happy with the results that you're getting in some area of your life, then it will be useful to actually make a change. And in order to make a change, you have to take responsibility for your own experience. So most of the time in those situations, what's happening is that we are imagining that something or someone outside of us is responsible for our experience, and that keeps that whole pattern stuck. So the first thing to do is to accept that responsibility for your experience. I propose that one thing that might be useful in regard to that is to get a useful perspective shift. So you could assume a third person perspective looking at yourself and notice if you were looking at your own self or your life from this outside perspective, what do you notice from that perspective? And that will probably help you to then be willing to actually just remain with the experience as it is. To remain with the experience as it is fundamentally just to be with the direct sensing, which is the seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, and smelling without the mental overlay, or even if there is mental overlay, which there almost certainly will be, to to just continue to slow down and come back to the direct sensing. And then I propose that sometimes that's sufficient in order to bring about the change. In fact, I would say always that is sufficient to bring about the change. In some cases, that can take a relatively long time, um, and it may be in those cases faster to process some of the overlays that are coming up using this polarity method that I've then described. So if you notice that there are things that are coming up, old habits of perception that are coming up, these overlays that you keep grabbing at them. You feel compelled to give your attention to them, then it will be useful to process them. And this simple polarity method is really useful. It's very simple, very quick. Um, Anybody can do it. Can be useful to process those to release the charge. And once you've released enough of those so that there's not much charge there, then you can more easily stay with the direct sensing. And as you do so, that will allow, to the degree that you want something new to emerge, it will allow something new to emerge, which will be more resourceful, more useful, more aligned with what you actually want in life instead of being freaked out. Um, so I hope that has made sense to you. If it doesn't and you're here live, then of course you can ask when we get to the group coaching, which will happen momentarily. For those who are not attending live and who watch this on YouTube, I'll just make a few mentions before we wrap up. So, first thing is if you're interested in joining these live, then you are welcome to do so. And you can get that information by signing up on my website. If you go to my website, joeylott.com, and you sign up for anything there, then once you've signed up, you will get access. I say sign up for anything. Sign up on whatever is offered there on the homepage. So presently, it is the free ebook, which has the five fundamental laws of creation. When you sign up for that or whatever is offered there, if that changes in the future, then you will get automatically an email with the information about how to join these calls live. When you do, then you'll be able to join the group coaching, which follows, which is a nice opportunity to be able to ask questions and get answers. And if there's an opportunity for direct coaching that seems to make sense, then we can do that as well. Uh, so there's that. Also, I wanted to mention, and I have to find, hold on a second, I have to bring up the link here. So I just want to mention that I am offering the a program that is for releasing limiting beliefs. And we have a special offer going from now until Christmas, I think it is, um, for that. So for those who are interested and who are here now or who watch this prior to Christmas, you can get that special offer. And that's the program is called Meaning Mastery. And it is at joeylott.com/meaning-mastery-special. So that is for the offer that is available through Christmas. After that, then it'll still be available, but the price goes up. So if you're interested, you should check that out. And then for those who want a more uh, even more comprehensive uh, opportunity to receive my support in achieving your goals, you may also be interested in the Manifesting Truth program, which is as I say, more comprehensive program, and that is available. You can get more information at joeylott.com/manifesting-truth. I'll provide the link to that in the description on YouTube. So that's all for now for those who are watching this on YouTube. So I'll just sign off on YouTube by saying blessings to you and bye for now.